My best friend's mom smiled and said calmly, "So you're why she won't date anyone." The first time I met my best friend's mother, she looked at me for nearly 10 seconds without saying a word. Then she smiled, not warmly, not suspiciously, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had just solved a mystery that had been bothering her for years. She placed a cup of tea in front of me, sat across the table, and calmly said, "So you're why she won't date anyone." I nearly dropped the cup. Across the kitchen, my best friend, Emma, froze like someone had just opened a door to a room full of secrets. And suddenly, I realized something terrifying. Her mother knew something about Emma's feelings that I had been too afraid to admit even to myself. Before we get into this emotional journey, if you believe kindness can change someone's life, that second chances are real, and that sometimes the person standing beside us has been waiting quietly for years, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes the greatest love stories don't begin with a confession. Sometimes they begin with two people who are too scared to lose their friendship. Emma and I had been best friends since college. We met on a rainy afternoon when I was sitting alone in the university library, trying to understand a textbook that seemed determined to destroy my confidence. Emma dropped into the chair across from me, placed half a sandwich on my book, and said she had bought too much lunch. It was a ridiculous lie. She had only one sandwich. But she noticed I hadn't eaten, and that was Emma. She always noticed things people tried to hide. From that day forward, we became inseparable. We studied together, worked our first terrible jobs together, celebrated birthdays together, and survived heartbreak together. Whenever one of us had a bad day, the other somehow knew before the phone even rang. But there was one subject we never discussed for long: relationships. Emma dated occasionally, but nothing ever lasted. She would meet someone, give them a chance, and then somehow find a reason to walk away. Sometimes she said they were too serious. Sometimes they were too careless. Sometimes she simply said she wasn't ready. Eventually, her family stopped asking. I stopped asking too. Not because I didn't care, but because every time another man disappeared from her life, I felt something inside me become strangely lighter. That realization scared me. I had spent years telling myself that Emma was my best friend and nothing more. I convinced myself that the strange jealousy I felt when someone flirted with her was protective instinct. I told myself that the tightness in my chest when she talked about another man was fear of losing my best friend. I told myself 100 different things because the truth was much more frightening. Somewhere along the way, I had fallen in love with her. I just never told her. The problem wasn't that I didn't want her. The problem was that I wanted her so much that I couldn't risk losing her. If I confessed and she didn't feel the same way, our friendship could disappear overnight. Every birthday, every late-night conversation, every stupid inside joke could become a memory. So I chose silence. It felt safer. Then, one Saturday evening, Emma called and asked me to drive her to her parents' house. She said her mother wanted help preparing dinner for a family gathering. I agreed immediately. I didn't know that by the end of the night, everything I had carefully hidden would begin falling apart. Her mother's house was warm and old-fashioned, filled with framed photographs and the smell of cinnamon and roasted vegetables. Emma's father was outside fixing something in the garden, and her mother welcomed me with a hug that felt surprisingly familiar. She had heard countless stories about me over the years, but this was the first time we had actually met properly. At first, dinner was normal. We talked about work, old memories, Emma's childhood, and the embarrassing things she had done as a teenager. Emma rolled her eyes while her parents laughed. I felt comfortable, almost too comfortable. Then her mother looked at Emma, looked at me, and smiled. "So you're why she won't date anyone." The room went silent. Emma's face turned bright red. She immediately protested, but her mother simply shook her head. She didn't look angry or teasing. She looked almost relieved. Like she had finally met the person she had been hearing about for years. I laughed nervously and tried to dismiss it as a joke, but Emma wouldn't look at me. Later that evening, while Emma was helping her father outside, her mother found me alone in the kitchen. She leaned against the counter and told me something that changed the way I remembered the last 5 years. She said Emma had loved me for a long time. I couldn't breathe. Her mother explained that Emma had never dated seriously because every time someone came close, she compared them to me. Not because I was perfect, she said, but because I made Emma feel safe. I was the person who answered her calls at 2 in the morning. I was the person who remembered how she took her coffee. I was the person who showed up without being asked when her father was sick. I was the person she trusted with every fear she had. Then her mother said something that hurt more than anything else. She thinks you don't see her that way. I stared at the kitchen floor. For years, I had been terrified that telling Emma how I felt would destroy our friendship. Meanwhile, she had apparently been living with the same fear from the other side. When Emma came back inside, she seemed nervous. Her mother disappeared into the dining room, leaving the two of us alone. Emma looked at me for a long moment and finally asked what her mother had said. I could have lied. For 1 second, I almost did. But I was exhausted from pretending. I told her the truth. I told her that I had loved her for years. I told her that I was afraid to say it because losing her would hurt more than never having her. I told her that every time she went on a date, I pretended not to care. I told her that every time she came home disappointed, some selfish part of me felt relieved. Then I apologized because I realized how unfair that was. Emma didn't speak. Her eyes filled with tears. I thought I had ruined everything. Then she whispered that she had spent years waiting for me to say exactly those words. The silence that followed felt endless. She told me she had tried dating because she believed I would never see her as anything more than a friend. She said every time someone asked her why she wasn't excited about a relationship, she couldn't explain that the person she wanted was already standing beside her. She said she had been terrified too. And then she reached across the table and took my hand. It wasn't dramatic. There was no music. No perfect sunset. No movie-style kiss. Just two people sitting in a quiet kitchen, finally telling the truth after years of hiding behind friendship. But life rarely gives us a clean ending just because we finally become honest. The next morning, Emma received a call from her father. His health had suddenly taken a serious turn. He needed surgery, and the family was terrified. Emma immediately became the strong one everyone depended on. She organized appointments, paperwork, insurance calls, and hospital visits. But I could see what everyone else couldn't. She was breaking. So I stayed. I drove her to the hospital. I brought food when she forgot to eat. I sat beside her during long nights in the waiting room. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. Sometimes she fell asleep with her head against my shoulder, and I simply stayed still because I didn't want to wake her. One night, after hours of waiting, Emma finally broke down. She admitted that she was scared of losing her father and terrified that everything in her life was changing at once. She said she had spent so many years trying to control what happened next that she had forgotten how to simply be present. I told her she didn't have to be strong every second. For the first time, she cried against my shoulder without apologizing. Her father survived the surgery. Weeks later, when he was recovering at home, I visited with groceries. Emma's mother opened the door, smiled, and said nothing. She simply hugged me. Then she looked over my shoulder at Emma, who was standing in the hallway. There was something peaceful in her expression. Months passed. Our relationship changed slowly. We didn't rush it. We didn't try to become some perfect couple overnight. We learned how to be honest. We learned how to disagree without being afraid. We learned that loving someone wasn't about never hurting them. It was about choosing to understand them, even when things were difficult. One evening, almost a year after that first dinner, Emma and I returned to her parents' house. Her mother was making tea in the same kitchen where she had exposed our secret. She looked at us and smiled. Then she said, "I knew it." Emma laughed and hugged her mother. I stood there watching them, realizing how close I had come to missing the most important relationship of my life because I was too afraid to risk the one I already had. The truth is, sometimes we think love arrives like lightning. Suddenly. Dramatically. Without warning. But sometimes love has been sitting beside us for years. It remembers our coffee order. It knows when we're lying. It answers the phone when we're falling apart. It stays when everyone else leaves. And sometimes, the hardest part isn't finding love. It's recognizing that the person we've been searching for has been standing beside us all along. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need a little reminder that kindness, patience, and honesty can change a life. And before we end, I want you to leave a special comment. Sometimes love was beside me all along. Maybe someone reading your comment today needs those words more than you realize. As for Emma and me, we still argue about ridiculous things. She still steals the fries from my plate. I still pretend to be annoyed. Her father still gives me advice I didn't ask for, and her mother still smiles whenever she sees us together. But sometimes, when I look at Emma across a crowded room, I remember that rainy afternoon in the library when she offered me half a sandwich she couldn't afford to share. I thought she was simply being kind. Maybe she was. Maybe she was also giving me the first piece of a life I would spend years being too afraid to ask for. And perhaps that's the most beautiful thing about love. It doesn't always knock on the door. Sometimes, it quietly sits beside you. And waits for you to finally notice.